at this point, they're not deliberately creating themselves. They're reacting automatically. And the way the child works, as soon as they're born, they start programming their mind, because they have to get, that's how you have to get by in the world. And they take in what works and put it in place as a program. They avoid what doesn't work, so they have a program not to do that. Well, if you have parents, for instance, that the only thing that works where you can feel safe is that you always please them, and if you don't, they get very angry, this person's going to grow up with unconsciously afraid of anger, and will therefore, as a leader, not do things that might anger someone, even though that's what's required for good leadership.
It's important to me also to hear you say that it's not that you may not see any outward manifestation of this. Are you saying you may not see any fear? You may, not feel any fear. You may not feel anything in your body, and still it is operating. So it's in your behavior that it is transpiring.
This stimulus can hit an unaware program which triggers fear. The fear, you may also have learned to make yourself unaware of the fear. If you do that, you can block the fear in your body. And that means you can get vasoconstriction, or you get tense muscles, you get the hypertensive person, and it can turn into high blood pressure. It can cause your glands to operate inappropriately, and you get excess, you can get ulcers and colitis, physical disorders, as the body blocks fear, and that energy is disrupting. Or it can come through into awareness, but then you don't know the cause, so what you're aware of is kind of a free-floating anxiety. But since that's very uncomfortable, you develop a lifestyle of trying to avoid this anxiety. Now, if it turns out the way to do that is to work, then you become a workaholic. A very common pattern is parents cause their children to see, if you make a mistake, you're in hot water. Do it right. You know, they don't give them room for error. And these people are very apt to develop an act of being careful, conscientious, productive, and responsible. And they're very, very apt, therefore, to go out to try to become a leader. That's a good way to do that. Only now, as they're leading and trying to get things done, they're always facing the possibilities of making a mistake, which activates the fear. So they become perfectionistic, over-controlling, very careful. And they over-control when they delegate, or they have to check it all themselves. And they're so careful, they rule out any errors, and it rules out creativity. So you get these nitpicking, perfectionistic, over-controlling leaders that the only people who will stay around and follow them are those who want to be told exactly what to do and have no creativity and no drive of their own.
And they're acting as 6-year-old children, basically.
Well, since almost everybody is acting like 6-year-old children, we program our personality mostly before we're 6. You know, people think they're born with their personalities. You're only born with characteristics that will, in my opinion, set the direction in which you move to shape your personality, but you learn your personality.
So, if we learn our personality and are not simply born with it, we can also change it, allowing us freedom from living as helpless psychological robots whose habits are fixed and on automatic. But how do you begin to reprogram yourself? How hard?
The human organism always reacts to avoid and get away from fear. It's painful. When you take the risk, you're going to have fear. What are you going to do with the fear? Let it run you or disappear? Every time I take action to avoid the fear, I reinforce the fear.
Hello, I'm Rick Ammey. You may not necessarily be who you think you are. Leadership expert Jim Farr says, like it or not, we have a secret opinion of ourselves that he calls our negative ground of being. Jim says we spend our lives trying to offset that negative perception by trying to be the mirror image of it, the opposite. And we do that in part by creating an act that we play out. If, for example, we secretly think we are unworthy or unlovable, we choose a path that proves that we are not. And yet, we never lose that unconscious belief of what we truly are, that negative ground of being. As leaders, the impact of this can be profound. As we return to North Carolina and our conversations with this man who has spent almost 5 decades counseling and advising others, we discuss how we can take awareness of our mind and use it to change our thinking and behavior. And the process of changing can be frightening.
What's life? Life is just being here, experiencing. And you could just run around experiencing randomly whatever happens and wherever you are. But that's not what most people do. They end up picking a script, in essence. I decide to be a successful executive. That immediately puts me into a particular pattern. I'll get a certain kind of education, I'll dress a certain way, I'll set up. So most people, in the way our culture is set up, one of the things they're doing by the time they grow up is picking their script, their path. Now, in a psychological sense, what they then do is go out and act as if that's them. So it becomes their act. I'm smart, I'm competent, I'm a leader, I'm successful, I work hard, I'm conscientious. We don't want to get that philosophical, but it's all made up. There's nothing there. So anything you're doing out there, you're making up an act, and you're making up that you're Rick. Well, you're not Rick. That's just the act you've made up.
But the acts that we have, the games that we play that we touched on briefly before, make it difficult for us to become aware of who we are, do they not?
Well, no. If you become aware of who you are, you'll still have an act. You'll create an act. You have to do something. The minute you set out to do something, you're acting. You're setting out an act. So your negative ground to being, everybody's going to set up an act. Or I mean, you can even have an act of sitting in a cave for 35 years and never moving. And the point of all what we've been discussing is you set up your act consciously and go after what you think you want, and your negative ground of being can be lurking in the background, upsetting it. And so one needs to know about it and manage it. And when you get rid of your negative ground, generally all you do is go out and continue your act and improve it. But you get rid of the parts that have been created in response to the negative ground. For instance, a leader keeps leading, but he's no longer over-controlling, and he's no longer overreactive to negative data, so he listens to feedback and so on. See, what the negative ground does is it triggers negative emotional and mental experiences.
Explain.
If the negative ground of being is that nobody loves me and you don't speak to me, it creates fear. The human organism always reacts to avoid and get away from fear. It's painful. So if I think I'm not lovable and I come up and say hi to you, and you may just be thinking of something and you ignore me, and all of a sudden my negative ground tapes say, uh-oh, you're not good enough for him, he doesn't like you, and comes fear. Well, that therefore causes me to take some action to deal with the fear, and can systematically interfere with or shape the way I set up all relationships so that I can't be hurt. I might go out and spend all my time running a lighthouse, just in the extreme, then I'm sure I can't be hurt by other people. Or I may, well, anyhow.
And so the point is, you've got to figure out a way to offset this.
Well, and the problem there, I hear where you're going, let me generalize it a little bit. The first step in becoming aware of your negative ground and all of that operation is you have to become aware that you're unaware. You don't start out becoming aware of your negative ground. You are unaware that you're unaware. Because automatically we're all aware, and there we are, we assume that's our awareness, and that's it. And it's through life as you go along, it gets to be a habit. This is it, this is the awareness, I'm aware of what is. Except you're not aware that you're unaware of a whole segment. So you don't even hunt for it. You don't even think about it. Well, when we get them in self-awareness training, first thing we try to do is get them to become aware that they're unaware. And then we try to get them curious about what am I unaware of. So now that they're aware that they're unaware, they go to work on the unawareness, never knowing what they're going to get or what they're unaware of, but now they're behaving in a manner to go through the unawareness to what's on the other side.
And this is the process that you need to go through to strip away as much of this baggage that is operating behind the scenes that is driving you the way.
Well, you want to strip away the games that are the product of what's behind. When you become aware of your negative ground or the beings about your belief, they don't go away. You just don't let them run you anymore.
Okay, so walk me through a process then. Walk me through the process of what you typically do with your self-awareness workshops to help people become aware of what they are unaware of.
Well, that gets very difficult to do. By and large, you don't get it through a head trip. You can't think your way through this. What happens is you have to put yourself in the position where you're. One thing we do is we get you to leave your defense down. And if you leave your defense down, all of a sudden you get what you're hiding from. You may burst out crying, or you may become frightened or angry or hurt, or you get memories of terror in childhood. Basically, what we do is try to get you to the point where you expose yourself to what you're afraid of instead of cutting it off. Now that takes, that's a very long and complicated
But give me an
process.
example of how you do that.
Well, for one thing, I could have you go through a guided fantasy where I take you through an experience which, if you really go with the guided fantasy and give up control, I can get you into the experience of a negative situation that really troubles you greatly, which you didn't allow yourself to think of before. Another one that I do, I get people, I can take two people and set them down like this, knee to knee, and have them look into each other's eyes and do absolutely nothing. And they become panic-stricken. So then we get to say, now, look at the panic. Don't try to get away from the panic. Watch what comes up in your mind. What is the other person thinking of you? And they'll share, oh, I thought the other person must think I look stupid. Oh.
And what am I learning from that as you're exposing me to that? As I'm feeling
That
the
just
feelings
because you're looking at me, I decided you thought I was stupid. Now, where did that come from?
there was something just coming inside. It was an internally driven dialogue.
Well, there's a lot more to it than that. You do a self-awareness training in, for instance, there's lots of ways to do it. But if you do it in a group and everybody starts sharing their problems, as you sit there listening to somebody else sharing a really extreme problem situation or a difficult and hurtful thing, you discover in you that you start crying, or you start resonating. Well, a lot of people will think that you're going through such a sad episode over there, and I'm being sad for you. But that's not the case. What I'm doing is what's going in you is resonating like a tuning fork at what's in me. So if I sit in awareness training where people are really laying out their their hurts, their sads, their emotions, their problems, and I watch my own inner reactions, I get a reading of what's in me because of what I resonate to, what's out there.
Okay, let's say, for example, you were somebody in one of your classes and you started crying because you were neglected as a child and you started emoting over this. Just for the sake of example, start reacting to that and I start crying too. Where do you go with that?
I would look at you and say, what's coming up in you? We put them in circumstances that expose them to what they usually hide from. And having set them up to, if you really get the most out of this, really experience what's there. Don't turn it off. Don't avoid it.
Okay. I'm trying to give the viewers some sense of what it is they get from a program that allows them to become aware of their unaware. So let's say then, if you don't mind following through in my example, I am emoting in response to something that you did in one of your, as a member of one of the courses, then I've got those feelings. You would tell me to go with these feelings?
I would sit there and say, be aware of whatever's in you. Don't block it off. Don't rationalize it. What are you feeling? What are you, if I said, what are you feeling, they'd say, well, I'm worried about how this is going to come out. And I would say, that is not a feeling, that is a thought. When you have that thought, what are you feeling? And they'll say, anxious. Oh, well, that's a general term for, that's a concept of what you're feeling. When you're anxious, what's the feeling? Fear. Fear? Oh, where is it in your body? Right here. Oh. What's it doing in your throat? It's making me want to cry. And so forth. It's all in there, and if I get them to pay attention to it and not block it, they get to experience it.
And then you take them where with that?
I don't take them anywhere. If they experience it, they are aware. I don't have to do anything. All I do is get you to go ahead and experience what's in there, and then I just sit and look at you and say,
so then but then what do I learn from that?
You learn what was in you that you didn't know was in you. You know, partly what we're doing is trying to get you to see and undo what you put in as a 3-year-old.
Right.
And you're not going to think your way through it. Now, let me just give you an example. If I figure out that you have a negative ground of being unlovable, and therefore it affects your whole social approach. At parties, it can go either way. Either you're over there overdoing and over pushy, but more apt to you're a wallflower and you're afraid to make contact, and when you do it's stilted and you don't open up and so on. If I get that that's what you're stuck in and you don't see it, that I'm unworthy, I may give you the assignment of going out to the party and making sure you meet 50 people and observe how you feel. Each time you're getting ready to approach them, watch what you feel, watch what you feel, watch what you want to say, watch what you want to do, but force yourself. Now, doing what I know will break your defense is going to expose you to what you're feeling at putting yourself on the line. These executives, these leaders that we're trying to get to handle people in a manner that's more motivating by letting them participate more. And they have to be in control, be right, and have power. One of the things I always tell them, now when you do this, when you start doing this, let me tell you, what I want you to do is watch exactly how you feel when you turn these decisions over to your subordinates instead of you getting to check on it. And you're very apt to find yourself getting very afraid. Take a look at what are you afraid of? What is it you think will happen if you don't monitor this and you let your subordinates do this? You will find out what's limiting you if you go ahead and have the fear. Because if you have the fear and just don't avoid it, you'll become aware of what your mind's telling you. And if you find out what your mind's telling you, you'll now know one of the beliefs that's been shaping the way you supervise your people. And it may be that you can't trust it. Your mind may say, you can't trust them, they don't care. Oh, well, that's a great mindset for becoming a leader and motivating people to participate. You can't trust them, they don't care. So anytime you're going to let them make the decision, since you can't trust them, you get anxious, and then you take action to avoid the anxiety, and don't let them make the decision. You go make sure it's okay. And they experience not being trusted. Well, I'm going to fix it so you're going to trust them and let them do it, and watch how anxious you get. And then if you sit with the anxiety, you'll find out what you're telling yourself that's making you anxious. And then you can do something about it. You can say, I can't be a good leader if I don't trust these people. And if they get that I don't trust them, they're not going to be motivated. I'm going to trust them. And when I do, I'm going to be frightened. But I'll do it anyhow.
Go toward what you fear.
Go through the fear. If you want to get out of what you're blocking and stuck in, you must. There is no way to become centered, which is what we call it when you get out of this, except through pain. Everybody shaping their personality builds a comfort zone, a safe zone. They push what's threatening into the unaware, and then they magnify all the things that are going to make them win, and then they build a pattern that fits what will make them win and avoids what they don't like, what they're afraid of, what will make them sad or depressed or angry or frightened, and their life gets comfortable. Now, and for the average person, it's a workable pattern. It works in our society the way it works. But if there's a negative ground of being that starts contaminating it, then you start getting the neurotic outcomes of this kind of thing. Well, if you want to fix that, you have to give up the negative protections from your negative ground. And the only way you can do that, the minute you do, you're going to get what you were protecting yourself from. You're going to get depressed. You know, one of the ways I can tell when people are really becoming aware, they get depressed. And they come in and say, goodness, what's wrong? I'm being depressed. And I say, already? I didn't think you'd make progress so rapidly.
Interesting.
Or they'll come in, if I do that, I get fear. Great. You've been running from your fear. That's how you stay unaware. You're going to have to practice letting your fear be there. And don't do what it tells you, do what you want.
Okay, so you feel that feeling, whether it be fear or anxiety or depression. Then you simply study on it. You don't act on it. You just become aware of that feeling that is being precipitated by whatever the circumstance is that you place them in, or they place themselves.
The way we put it is, don't do anything, just have the experience. If you have fear, just sit there and have fear, consciously, on purpose. Look at it, feel it. Watch what your mind is saying. Now, generally what you do when you have the fear, you put it in a hose, you know, and that focuses it. But if you just have it, you get to look at it, be aware of it, and then it disappears.
Not overnight, obviously.
No, that one right then and there disappears. Now, the tape system doesn't disappear. You may have that for the rest of your life. But now I know, anytime I start this, I'm going to have a fear that's going to make me want to mess it up this way, but I won't allow that after this. I will do it the other way, and I'll have the fear. You can't stop the automatics. It's in there and wiring, but now you're aware of it, and it comes down to where the fear says, do this, and you'll be safe. You say, no, and you don't do it, which means the fear didn't get reinforced as a successful way of avoiding the threat. That, if you do that over and over and over, that begins to extinguish that circuit.
And it's harder to do the older you are, is what you're saying, because that circuit is more firmly planted in you.
Yes. So the first thing is, if to know, you set up your problems because you let the avoidance patterns succeed, which therefore reinforces the avoidance patterns. So if you're afraid to be creative because you might make a mistake, and then you go out and you always double check and make sure it's right, which rules out creativity, you're reinforcing that fear because your carefulness succeeds. So the thing you need to do is go take some risks. When you take the risks, you're going to have fear. What are you going to do with the fear? Let it run you or disappear it? Disappearing it means if I sit here and just have the fear, within 10 minutes it's going to disappear. It's chemical and it's tension and so on. So now, if you want to change yourself, therefore, first off, you have to stop reinforcing the defensive mode, then pick out a new one. Now, every time you do the new one, you're going to get fear, which is not reinforcing, but you're going to get the satisfaction of, I did it and it worked, which is reinforcing. If you do that over and over and over, eventually this will become your learned predominant pattern, and eventually maybe this one will even stop working. By and large, though, the kind of things we're talking about are so inherent in the personality structure that once you become aware of them, they don't go away. It's like you got programs in your computer, but you don't bring them up. They're still in there. These stay in there, too. And as you're going down the path of learning it, you get better, but you keep pressure, and you'll regress back to the old program. Ultimately, you may be totally free of the program, but it's still there, but you never use it. It's just an old wiring. It's kind of like, you know, there's some wires in the wall here and switches I don't ever use anymore, but it's still there. One way of saying is you don't get rid of your stuff. You become responsible for it.
So when we attempt to change, to move out of our comfort zones, we are going to encounter fear and other strong emotions. But we can learn to face those powerful feelings, take note of them, not react to them. And over time, those feelings lose their hold, and our new behaviors become more comfortable. In our next conversation with Jim Farr, we will discuss further.
Most of us get stuck in our thinking brains, and all of our universe is a function of us running our tapes and listening to our dumb mind. If you're going to be a leader, start right away learning the techniques of mapping the mental terrain. Once you decide that here's the new pattern that I want, then you have to ask, what kind of mindset do I need to have to produce that sort of pattern?
Hello, I'm Rick Amy. As a leader, once you know that you can change the way you think, how specifically do you make the changes that will accomplish what you want at the office and at home? The incentive to modify yourself is that you may transform your life. In this next conversation with leadership expert Jim Farr at his farm near Greensboro, North Carolina, he outlines a method for reprogramming yourself.
Well, once you decide that here's the new pattern that I want, then you have to ask, what kind of mindset do I need to have to produce that sort of pattern? You know, for example, I may find that whenever so-and-so is around, I act in a suspicious, untrusting way. That's how I handle. And it interferes with our relationship. And I decide that I want this to be in an open and supportive relationship. So now I have to stop that behavior which he reacts to as unsupportive and untrusting and generate a new one. So I figure out how I want that to be. What kind of behavior should I engage in? How should I react to you? And then, instead of saying, okay, what kind of mind program do I need? What I do is I sit down and deliberately do that. Now, if it's really interfering with my personality, all kinds of difficulties come up, and then I can focus on handling those difficulties. Or if it doesn't cause difficulties, then I just have to focus on doing it enough so that it becomes an incorporated habit. Where this usually comes up is people are running their lives with certain chronic problems that keep occurring, or chronic difficulties in relationships or whatever, that they want to get rid of. Well, let's take, they lose their temper. They don't have enough control of their temper. They don't know why, or they don't know how it happens. It just happens. What they need to start doing is running some correlations, noticing the characteristics of the conditions where they lose their temper. And from that, they can make inferences as to what belief is triggering the sense of threat that they're reacting to with anger.
Now, how technically does someone do this? Do they just simply do as the actors do, develop a third eye, kind of look down on themselves and observe and then write this out?
In some cases, they do that. In other cases, they may need counseling, to somebody to point out that, you know, you always do this when you're with an older man. You're not aware of that. That there's something that triggers an older man. You know, and a typical example could be an executive who gets promoted who's quite young and has to supervise a bunch of senior, more experienced managers who would have internal insecurity and shyness about telling older, smart, intelligent older folks what to do, and might not even know that. So he's too diffident in his leadership, he's not controlling and assertive and definite enough. And or, in the model I was using, something in that may cause him to get angry. But he doesn't know what it is. At that point, I might be able to say to him, notice when this happens. And he begins to notice, well, it happened with that one, and that one, but not those three. What's the difference in them? They're older and they're younger. Ultimately, he can catch on that I have some kind of reaction to older people that causes me to feel threatened, and I react with anger.
Would the leader be able to self-correct?
At that point, the leader can then say, oh, now that I know, when next time I'm going to talk to those people, I will not get angry. Now, the anger may come up, but I will not act it out and I will not show it. Instead, I will do X, Y, and Z.
So this is the inventory. You're just taking note. So in other words, it's a psychological inventory. Instead of taking an inventory of how the bottom line is working in your company, you just take note of where the hot buttons are for you and
what you're getting or what you're missing.
Yeah.
And then what do I have? The first thing you can usually do then is, it's a sequence. There's the behavior, then there's the mind program, then there's the perception, and then there's the stimulus. So you start backwards. You start out noticing first the behavior I don't want. Now, I can control the behavior, but I may not know where it's coming from. But I control the behavior, and then if I substitute something else, whatever the behavior was doing gets left undone, and I may feel the fear, the anger, whatever it is.
Based on your experience, would most executives be able to, once having made this inventory, be able to self-correct?
If the average executive who's basically just learning new skills, that's no problem. He can figure out, I'm handling my staff meeting wrong. The way I'm reacting to suggestions is turning people off. And I do it because I'm impatient. Okay, I end up saying one of the things you need to do is be less impatient. Now you don't even know you're impatient. So now you have to start becoming aware of when you're getting impatient. Start noticing, what do they do that makes you impatient? Well, it's whenever they're doubting my word. Oh, well, okay. Now you start watching for whenever that's happening, and you stop the impatience.
So having a consultant wouldn't be a bad idea either, to help you take inventory of what is going on.
Actually, for the most part, you need a helper, a trainer, a counselor, or an outside agent. It's very hard to see through your own defenses. You need somebody to get you data. If you're offending people, they won't tell you. Somebody else, they'll tell somebody else, and you can get the data. When you're starting to change your personality to any depth, you need a mirror. You need a helper.
Part of this process, as part of this process, you have written that you need to take responsibility for what is going on. I would think that would be self-evident, but then there must be people who are not taking responsibility.
No, being responsible in that case means that I don't let my automatic tapes run me. I choose. So my urge is to be angry, but I am responsible for my behavior. So in spite of the anger, that's what I mean by responsible in that case. When you automate and go on automatic pilot, you've stopped being responsible for what comes out. You're leaving it to the program. Being responsible means that I take back responsibility for the program.
And so let's say you do have a counselor or coach, or you're doing
And
it on your own.
incidentally, let me interrupt.
Surely.
That counselor or coach can be a coworker where you say, hey, anytime you see me doing this, will you call it to my attention? That's someone outside helping you. When you see me doing that which upsets people, will you let me know?
Would you suggest that all leaders or all prospective leaders do one of these self-inventories?
I would suggest that all leaders be trained in self-awareness techniques, and that they be trained in understanding their own personality, their own makeups, their own defenses, and how to manage them.
If you were a young prospective leader, a rising leader, the sooner you get onto this, the better off you would be, I presume?
If I were a young leader and knew that's what I wanted for my career, I would wish to dickens there was an ML program in leadership where I could go study all of that kind of, all of the psychology of leadership, the processes of leadership, and the personal leader self elements of being a leader.
ML, master leader?
I just made it up. Yeah.
Okay.
There isn't one, but I would like to see one.
And without that, then the next best thing is to go to where?
Well, the next best thing, if you get aware that there's unawareness and you need to be aware of it, you can just make it a policy that you always go ask for feedback. You make it a habit. Wherever you are, you get feedback. Wherever there's a chance, you get some of this training. When you're doing performance appraisals, you spend as much time finding out how they see you as you do telling them where they are.
Suppose you are on this path of improving yourself, changing the way you operate, but you get resistance. Resistance either from above, from those, or down from below, from the followers. What do you do in that case?
It depends what you mean by resistance.
Well, let's say you want to stop playing a certain game that you've been playing with the boss, and the boss...
What happens there, for example, if the boss has a game, the boss needs you to play your side of the game. Remember, if you've got a game, you have to play it because that's how you're keeping your internals together. So if the boss hired you because you do a good job of playing the other side of his game, and you stop playing the game, you're leaving him hanging high and dry. And hey, if he puts out a game cue and you don't respond, he'll put out a game cue because he needs his fix.
So it's another kind of taking responsibility.
If taking responsibility, if I'm going to work with this situation with that kind of boss who does that kind of things, I'm going to be responsible not to act my side of it like an ass.
So you're not running on automatic, you're choosing.
At that point. It still may make me very upset when he does what he does, but I won't act it out. I'll just...
Now let's say you've been a leader who's been rather dictatorial, and you recognize that you've been dictatorial, and you're trying now to be a lot more reasonable in the way in which you deal with your followers, but they're scared to death because they don't understand what the heck is going on here because suddenly you've changed. What do you do in those kinds of circumstances?
Well, that gets into technology again. I would teach such a leader, hey, they have mindsets and expectations of the way you are. If you start changing in the face of those mindsets, they're going to act out of those mindsets. Why don't you have a development session with your people and tell them you've learned that you're over-controlling and too dominating and you think that's not good leadership, and you've decided to change it because you want to give them more space to grow, and I would like you to engage in this process with me, and if you catch me being too... and so forth. In short, give them the mindset of being in on the change process.
You know what you're telling me is, Jim, or at least what I'm hearing, is that you can't change yourself in a vacuum.
Not unless you exist in a vacuum, and I don't know anybody who does.
But there's this tendency to think, I mean, you see the self-help books all over the place. You do this, you can do that, and you can become this or that or the other. Well, but what you're saying is you can't do this in isolation because there are these games, there are these interconnections that you have got to deal with.
Yes, but you can still change you. You know, if you if you meditate regularly, you're going to change. If you keep it up for 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to change.
Now, this is the
No
second
matter
time.
what's around, you will change.
Now, this is the second time in the course of these conversations you brought up the power of meditation. Elaborate as to why that holds so much fascination.
Meditation is 2 things. For one thing, it's practice. Well, it's 3 things. Most of us get stuck in our thinking brains, and all of our universe is a function of us running our tapes and listening to our dumb mind, which is not really us and not alive. And in order to become enlightened, you have to get free of your mind, and you have to get to the point where you make up your mind instead of having your mind make you up. You have to get into your being, or however you want to put it, so that you make up your mind instead of the other way around. Now, if your mind is thinking all the time, that's all you're listening to, then you're stuck in your mind. Meditation, one of the first things you do is you begin to practice not thinking. Well, if you're not thinking, what are you going to be aware of? All of the stuff you've been missing while you listen to your dumb thoughts and your repetitive thoughts. You begin to feel and hear and all sorts of... That's one part of meditation. Now, doing that and watching your mind, you begin to see your games. You begin to see the foolish beliefs. You begin to see what you're afraid of.